This week, I read some cozy, some crazy, and some hard books, and I'm going to tell you about them. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole, and I think I'm going to start with the cozy book that I read. And that would be The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. I feel like this is a book that has been going around YouTube and BookTube, especially for quite a while, and I believe I finally found it one day in a little free library, and I said, sure, I'll take it. Let me give it a try. So here's my thoughts on this book. First of all, I think it is worth noting that if you didn't know, this is a children's picture book, which is not something that I would normally read or pick up or own. But again, I was able to get a hold of it for free, and I hit an evening where I wanted something to read, and I was in between books, and I wasn't sure what I was going to read yet, and I didn't want to figure it out yet. So I decided to sit down with something that was fast and simple, and this fit the bill. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there who absolutely love this book, but I actually, after reading it, didn't feel like I could read it. I felt like it was very strongly a children's book and that it just wouldn't be fair for me to, personally to rate it as an adult. I think it very much had a lot of the strong, comforting messages that you would hear over the course of your lifetime, or at least that I have heard over the course of my lifetime, just through people and adults and other books. I didn't feel like there was anything new in the book, which at first I was a little disappointed by. But then I thought, if I was reading this to a child, that kind of makes sense. I don't know that there's any new grand idea that I would necessarily be wanting to present to the age child that this is for. So it was really more like a walk down memory lane of like all the truisms that you need to remind yourself of. So, would I recommend this book? Yeah, absolutely. I think this would be a really nice book for children to read of any age, really anyone of any age who really just needed all the comfort that the world could provide. Also, the illustrations in here are so well done. It definitely gives me sort of a Winnie the Pooh vibe, if that makes sense. And it was just nice. It would be nice to have like a cup of cocoa and just sit with this for a short time and ponder the little messages. Read between the lines. I'm a hardened, and this is a book that I'm going to pass on to my husband. He is such a wonderful, sweet, sensitive person, and I just read him and gave him a couple of lines from this book, and I swear he was already tearing up. So, what this book has told me is that everybody who loves this has a very kind, soft soul, unlike myself. The next book that I have to talk about is more on the crazy side, and not because the book itself was necessarily so crazy, but the idea of what our protagonist did is out of this world. And that book is Diary of a Void by Yagi. This is translated from Japanese and is a work of literary fiction that was published in 2020. And this tells the story of Shibata, who is a 34-year-old woman, and she is escaping her previous job, which ended in a very gross encounter with her employer, and she is just looking to kind of start over, but is finding herself in her new job as the only woman there who is seemingly being given all the menial tasks, and she's realizing that she may be in another dead end situation. So Shibata, single woman that she is, decides to do what any woman would do and bring some life into the world in the form of a pregnancy. The only thing is, Shibata's not actually pregnant, and there is where the genius of the book begins. When she tells her coworkers that she's not pregnant, she suddenly finds that she no longer has to get everybody coffee, make the coffee, nor clean up the coffee because, being pregnant, the coffee smells make her feel nauseous. And of course, everyone understands that. And she no longer has to tidy up after her coworkers as they start to realize that that might not be good for her. She should take it easy. Why should she have to do everybody else's work, especially if she's pregnant? So, no tidying, no coffee, no problem. And we end up going on and spending about 10 months or so with Shibata as she goes through all the stages and changes and comforts and happiness of forming a new life for herself and her soon to be born child. I thought this was such a fascinating way to make a satire and commentary on the workplace and women's roles just in society and in the workplace in general, and how motherhood can come to be involved in that for better or for worse. You get a lot of interesting conversations between Shibata and her coworkers, her employers, and even her friends and strangers she meets around town as she continues to fill the void in her life. This book was also full of a lot of, to me, surprisingly beautiful scenes and moments as she wanders around. The vast majority of the book is pretty straightforward in the writing style, but every now and then she'll come across something, and Yagi just describes those moments in just a masterful way. I really enjoyed the writing in those areas, and yeah, it just really carried the story along and gave it a really interesting atmosphere. I don't know that I really had any major noticeable lows in the book, but I also don't feel like I had any strong highs. I did end up giving this book 4 stars, however. I would highly recommend this book to anyone who just enjoys a very gentle, slightly humorous nod at society and the world we live in, and just how silly some of our gender and social roles and even cultural rules can be. It really highlights just how we can go over the top in thinking that we're being nice while at the same time making you wonder, why don't we do this all the time? I also thought that this would be a great book for anyone who enjoyed There's No Such Thing as a Easy Job. Is that the whole title? I'll put it up on the screen. I really enjoyed that book, and something about the atmosphere, the magical realism, and just the constant tongue-in-cheek look at the workplace very much reminded me of that other book, and I think if you liked one of these books, you would probably like the other one as well. If you're interested in books that make comments on gender roles or women's roles in the workplace or out of the workplace in society in general, I think you would like this book and just the different look it has at all of those areas. I think this is a great book for people who are mothers or have experienced motherhood, as well as people who are single or maybe even have no thought or plans to become mothers, because this book, while she does, fill the void, isn't necessarily about motherhood itself. It is told from the perspective of a single person who remains single throughout the book. And so I think it does discuss a lot of things outside of motherhood, even though that does come up frequently throughout the book because everyone knows she's pregnant. So, yeah, this was a surprisingly interesting premise, and I think the book did a good job living up to the premise, and he even had a very fascinating ending that was kind of open-ended in a way that I feel like a lot of contemporary Japanese fiction can be, but not so open-ended that I feel like it ended up with a choose your own adventure kind of situation. So if you like your books to end in that manner, I would definitely say give this one a try. The third book I read this week was definitely on the harder side, but not in the way that I thought it was going to be. But there were definitely mental gymnastics going on inside my brain. And that book is Solaris, which is pondering the idea of what does it mean to be alive, to be human, all while studying a possibly sentient ocean. So Solaris, if you don't know, is a classic sci-fi Polish translated philosophical horror classic. Yeah, it's all those things wrapped in one not very long book. In case you're wondering about the translation part, my understanding, I don't know if in this edition, because they don't always say, but there are some editions of this book that have been translated from Polish to French to English. So you may want to read a few pages and check out your edition before starting it, because the English version you have may be a bit more convoluted than the book itself is. Needless to say, the edition I have is put out by Harper Voyager and is translated from the French by Joanna Kilmartin and Steve Cox. And it worked out. I didn't know it had gone through so many loops until somebody else pointed it out to me. What do I have to say about this book? First, let me tell you what the book is about. This book follows Kevin, who is a scientist turned psychologist, because apparently everything in this book has to be multiple steps to get to the final goal. I don't know. But Kevin is being sent on a mission from Earth to Solaris, which is a far, far, far out planet that has been studied for over 100 years at this point. Even before Kevin was born, they were studying this planet. And yet, scientists still can't figure out what is actually going on Solaris. They do know that the vast majority of Solaris is covered by an ocean, a blob, a somewhat kind of gooey object that looks like an ocean, kind of, sort of. I don't know. They can't even quite figure that out. And so scientists, for as long as Kevin can remember, have been arguing about what exactly is the form that makes up the vast majority of Solaris, and what does that mean to humans? Kevin is going out to Solaris because he has received a message from a mentor slash hero of science for him, and he is called there to help the crew figure out what is going on. And when he arrives, he finds that the desperate message is just part of an even more desperate situation that is going on Solaris. Kevin suddenly finds himself mixed up in a very strange situation with a very peculiar set of characters, and he needs to quickly get to the bottom of things before he or they or all of them go crazy, because that seems to be the main direction of everything that is going on this planet. In the meantime, they also discuss philosophy, have to deal with past memories and lives, and figure out if any of what's actually going on is actually happening. For me, the best part of this book definitely had to do with the world building and the atmosphere, or lack thereof, since they're on a strange planet. But I really thought that Stanislew Lem did a great job of really making you feel like you were in a particular place, creepy as that place may be, because yes, that was a creepy atmosphere to be in. Everything about the Solaris station just felt off the entire time, and you just felt your skin crawling. And I felt like I didn't want to look at reflective surfaces or behind me. Even now, I don't want to think about looking behind me in the camera. Like, I don't know, this book really creeped me out, and I really enjoyed the ride. It wasn't like overly much so, but it was a like, I'm only gonna read this during the daytime. And I surprisingly liked that feeling. For me, if there were any lows in this book, it had to do with the couple of times where Kevin would read out of a book, which happened a couple times in here, and you got kind of a reading the text that your character is reading in the book thing, which doesn't bother me, but there was at least once, if not twice, where I felt like it went on just a little too long, a little bit too tangential, and I made the mistake of putting the book down in the middle of one of those scenes and picking it back up, and I was like, what the heck are we talking about? So I will warn you, if you are in certain scenes, make sure you wait until you get to an end of a chapter before putting the book down, because otherwise you may also be confused. Then again, it might just be me. The only other thing that I didn't like is I think at the end of the book, I don't know that I was totally convinced about the meaning and themes. Like, I got the end point for the character. I'm not sure that Stanislew Lem convinced me of his meaning and his thoughts on the subject. And I don't want to get too much into the themes because I feel like that'll kind of give away a little bit of the plot. I did still give this book 4 stars, and I would recommend it to anybody who likes science fiction or philosophical fiction or horror mystery thrillers. There's a lot of different genres this book covers, and I was surprised by how well it was covered. The overall tone and feel of the book is kind of like a detective story mixed with a bit of thriller horror vibes. So if you like that type of atmosphere, I think you would enjoy this book. It is solidly in the science fiction genre, however, just in terms of being in space and exploring a planet and that kind of thing. And then the philosophical fiction really has to come in with the meaning and the conversations that the characters have. I would say while there is some science going on, a lot of their discussion isn't necessarily about science itself. Their discussions tend to be more about philosophy and sort of metaphysical ideas and that kind of thing. So if you like those discussions but want it in a very strange environment and atmosphere and setting, this may be a good science fiction to try. And because there is sort of a detective mystery type of situation going on amongst the crew, it does keep the plot moving really well, which I was rather surprised by. I thought it was going to be a slower paced philosophical sci-fi, and I was happy to find that it really wasn't that. So that's it. Those are the 3 books that I read this week. I feel like I should have more to say about them, but I guess really the first book was pretty short and I didn't have much to say, and the other 2 were pretty straightforward as well. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. And let me know if you've read any of these 3 books, what your thoughts are on them, and I'll talk to you next time.